You are listening to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and this is episode 4 in a series of episodes about what we are to do with sorrow, with grief, with big emotions, particularly vis-a-vis ritual, moving our bodies. And I am joined today by Heather Stringer, my friend. Heather, it's good to see you.
So good to see you.
Here's why Heather's here. Heather is here because she actually knows something about rituals, and I'm a bit of a rookie novice. I'm very passionate about it, but I have not personally or professionally played in these waters like Heather has. So Heather, I've invited you on because frankly, I would love for your expertise to be shared with the listeners. And let's make it real practical from the get-go, because I've done previous episodes kind of fleshing out what rituals are, why they're important, but we need more examples. So can you just start with, you conduct rituals, you design them, you conduct them, you implement them, you bear witness to them. Mm-hmm. Let's start with an example of a ritual where somebody moved their body, did symbolic actions in a way that was designed for healing.
Well, I am, first of all, so happy to be able to talk to you about this. Like, this is such a sweet spot, passion of mine that, I mean, there's so much to mine here. The first one that comes to mind is just, I mean, as far as the importance of the body goes and symbolism, there was a woman who had experienced a lot of different sexual trauma more in her adult life, and she knew that she needed to release it. She knew that there was something about the way that it was clinging to her body, clinging to her heart, that was keeping her from moving into other relationships. And so there was a series of things that we did that eventually led us to this moment of, will you actually embody your rage that you've had? So we went out into the forest, and it was her and some of her dearest friends. And as we're in the forest, I'm inviting her to begin to express the rage that's in her from all those different moments where her no was silenced, her no was destroyed, and there was such violation. And I could tell, like, at first it was a little bit tentative, right? There's something about the uncivilized nature of rage, or kind of any emotion really, that is so necessary for us to get close to, but because it's uncivilized, we find ourselves overthinking it. And so I could tell as she was like giving expression, yelling, it's like, okay, you're still in your prefrontal cortex. You're still in that part of your brain that's saying, don't look like a fool. Don't look like a fool. But over time and with repetition, she began to really connect kind of in a guttural, in her stomach sort of way, where I could tell like she is actually giving voice to all of the harm that she's known. And I'm pretty sure I had her in Warrior One pose as she was doing it. And so it was over the course of, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes, she is raging, howling, but then also her friends join.
Join how?
Join in, like giving expression and yelling with her. And I think that that's part of like the unison, the chorus of this rage of like, how dare someone have trespassed this woman? And then at a certain point where I could tell like this is like in her, you know, there's something of like the unity of heart, body, mind, soul. I then invited her to move into Peaceful Warrior. And there was something about that movement from Warrior One, giving rage a voice, and then moving into Peaceful Warrior, that you could just tell like something broke. Something like I wasn't even expecting. Like I couldn't have planned for that. But the reality of it is that she was released. And I think that was a moment that was, you know, so holy, so profound, and again, outside of my control.
There's a couple of things that I just want to notice with you. Number one, you're not indoors.
Yes.
You're
Yeah.
out in the wild, out in the forest, which connects us to more primal, human, frankly, parts of ourselves. Her rage could not have been expressed indoors. It's just not, it doesn't match the nature of her rage. Number two, she's not alone. It's not just you and her either.
Right.
There are other witnesses Number three, you have intentionally thought through ahead of time that you're going to invite her to get in warrior one pose and to connect to an emotion, in this case, rage.
Mm-hmm.
And it took her a little bit of time
Mm-hmm.
to get there because we're accustomed to offices and indoor lights and, as you put it, civilized behavior. And that's just not very human all the time. And it's not fitting to sexual assault. I don't remember what number I'm on, but the next thing that I'm just observing is that something happened that you didn't plan for. And that frankly you may not even fully understand. But something inside of you was prompted to invite her to move from warrior one and rage to peaceful warrior, which is a very different bodily position with different meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not planned. That just happened spontaneously in the midst of what I would call the sacred. Am I naming it well?
Yeah, you're naming it perfectly well. The categories are great. It's not something that's not how my mind works, but it's good to see kind of that progression and what was happening and needing to happen in order for her to move through something that had previously bound her.
Right.
I think that's the thing with language. We need language. Obviously, language is what also liberates us, but language can also confine us. And more the spoken word probably, but there was something about her body language, like what all the memories that were stored in her body. If the body's keeping the score, then there is a necessity to giving that expression, to moving,
Yes.
but not in a way that's reckless, right? Not in a way that's violent, not in a way that's recreating trauma, but allowing her to give voice, like her body, who's been an innocent bystander, for her body to give voice to this horror that she's known.
Yes. And the nature of sexual assault and trauma more generally is that our bodies are not able to do actions that they want to do
Yeah.
in the moment. And so the nature of sexual assault is her body had inclinations and impulses to push away, to move, to do stuff. And it was clear that that was not going to help establish safety. And so her body was, in that sense, stopped from moving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in the forest, her body was able to connect to that memory and move.
Mm-hmm.
And her mouth screamed.
Right.
And somehow the completion of those movements and actions brought, and here's the key word that you said, brought release of something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think why ritual is so important is that if we're not in ritual with our lives, then we are often assaulted by life. Like, and what I mean by that is, if we're not making meaning and allowing our bodies to move through something, then it just stays within us and it constantly kind of attacks us, right? And that's part of why she knew there was something that she needed to do on her behalf, because the assault that she experienced was becoming a perpetual assault against her, keeping her from moving into relationships, into maybe new romance. And so that's part of where it's like, this is the ritual can be the antidote to, I think, when life happens or life is going to happen, whether it's you get a diagnosis and things are going to happen to you. Like, how do you do ritual so that you're not assaulted by the surgery, assaulted by the chemotherapy? There's something about like, I'm going to choose to release my body, even though I don't want to, even though it brings me so much grief and so much loss. But here is where I get to have agency to say, I'm going to give up this before it's just like taken. I think we're so off, we just know those experiences of like things are just taken. So it's both a release in terms of what is about to happen that we know of, but then also a release of what has happened to us and we haven't had the sacred container to give expression.
And so if I'm hearing you right about the ritual in the forest, something happened inside this woman's mind, heart, and body that allowed her to show up differently in her relationships, particularly romantic relationships going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And You seem to be suggesting that that likely would not have happened without ritual.
Oh, I don't want it's teetering on arrogance. I think it's true. Okay, so here's the thing. I think it expedites the process, maybe. And maybe expedite's not the right word. Maybe it's what's been needed all along, but maybe it would have taken her 10 years, 20 years. I don't know. Again, I'll never know, but there was something about like a significant shift happened after that moment. And she would testify to that too. Like there was something that really radically shifted and she found love, like, probably I think it was like a year or two after that. There is something to be said of like what I don't know. I don't know all the inner workings of what happens when we intentionally gather and with a level of honesty and honor, but something breaks free.
Right. And in the word that comes to mind for me is from Isaiah 61. Something was released. And that's what the Spirit of God is about in the world, is releasing places where we're bound. And trauma keeps us bound. Okay. Example number 2. And by the way, we've gotten permission, Heather's gotten permission to share these stories. Will you share the story of Casey?
Oh, this is a dear friend of mine who I've met since moving here to New York City. And she is someone who is vivacious, full of life, competent, is able to juggle multiple things. And she found out that she had breast cancer. But not only breast cancer, she was then informed shortly thereafter that she would have to have a double mastectomy. So it was just slam after slam. She has 4 kids. So there was something of like her getting knocked off of her feet. And so one of the things that I realized is that she's someone that does not complain. Like she's not one that will pity herself. She is someone that will move through, continue going on. And I asked her at one point, I'm like, what if we did a ritual for you before you go into your surgery? And she was open to it. Like she's not resistant to like getting into the pain, but it's something where it's like she's really well versed in like continuing to move and get the job done, right? And so she was open to it, and we held a ritual for her days before her double mastectomy. So one of the things that I knew about her is that she doesn't want pity. She doesn't want advice. And as she feels more of her grief, she doesn't want she doesn't want to think that there's going to be judgment. So one of the things that I did before was I wanted her to have some time by herself in the ritual space to just kind of center, spend some time with herself and before we entered. And as we entered, we had candles and we sang a song over her. We sang Down to the River.
And who's we?
Some of her dearest friends in the city. And so we sang, as I went down to the river to pray, studying about that good old way, and who shall wear the robe and crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, sisters, let's go down, come on down. Oh, sisters, let's go down in the river to pray. And after we sang that a few times, just as daughters and as sisters going down to the river, we each had something that we wanted to offer her. So we had a bowl, and a pitcher of water, and we said, we come offering you. And as we poured the water, we said, our presence, our love, our bodies as a signs of solidarity. And then we broke twigs and we said, we offer these things with no strings attached, no debt owed, no judgment of need, no cursing of weakness, no pity, no resentment. And then we anointed ourselves with oil and we said, we offer from knowing our wounds, our weakness, our need, our strength, our blessing. And there was something I think about that moment. I mean, she just had tears in her eyes, and it just, you could tell she settled and she was in a position of like, I can receive this, I can move into like the pain of what I am having to face. So I can pause here because I feel like there's I want to take maybe a breather. There's just something so tender about that moment that I feel right now even, but there's other pieces that feel important to name as well.
Well, what strikes me is like as you're narrating this, like I don't know this woman and I'm teary.
Hmm. I know.
There's something about the humanity of something that is not often done in our cultures that is so moving to me. You didn't say a lot of words, but you did something with your bodies. And here's really the key phrase, with your limbic brains.
Hmm.
Her friends, you, her. And it was a moment of immense connection that was beyond words.
Hmm.
Although words were offered,
Hmm.
there was something happening that was deeper than words, symbolized by the breaking of the twigs, the pouring of the water, the singing in unison. And something happened in her being that prepared her to be cut.
Yeah. I mean, what she was facing was so horrific. And yet there was something of the cushioning, of the preparing that allowed, I think, for her to go into that experience like with our faces, right? With our singing, with the fact that when she comes out and she's in so much pain that she knows that we're going to come to her without strings attached, without judgment, without cursing her weakness, and that we will come to her knowing that we, our bodies too, we know our wounds, we know our weaknesses, we know our need. And there, I think that's like, oh God, I mean, I feel it. I'm like, we need this so much.
What's the this, Heather?
Mm. I mean, I think we need, maybe going back to even what you're saying, just like our humanity held and shared, like the sharing of pain, the sharing of suffering, because because of, I mean, especially being white Americans specifically, there's such a, and in a Western society, it's like there's just, we have been so separated from what it means to share and commune with one another in symbolic bodily ways. And so that's, I think that's part of what I mean by this. But it's almost like I don't even know if I have words for this other than like just what just was shared. It's just really, it's such a holy place. It's in the dirt, it's in the blood, it's in the tears that like we find ourselves again.
Did she say anything about what happened for her just with the portion of the ritual that you've narrated?
She said that she felt a kind of sisterhood. I don't know. I can't say that she's ever known a sisterhood like that. I won't be presumptuous, but there was something of like I had my, one of the women called it like cancer bridesmaids. Like we were her cancer bridesmaids, right? Like there was something of what we were preparing her for. But she said that there was, yeah, there was a sense of sisterhood that allowed her to move into that, yeah, in a different way.
I love that phrase, cancer bridesmaids.
Hmm. I love it and hate it.
Well, in this sense, maybe it's an imperfect analogy, but it's true in this sense. From that day forward, she had a relationship with cancer.
Yeah.
And in the words of Francis Weller from The Wild Edge of Sorrow, that I quoted in the last episode, this is not a time to go it alone.
Yeah. And I wonder, do you mind if I share what she wrote post
Please.
reflection? I feel like there's something to be said. So this is what Casey wrote, maybe a day after the ritual. And she said, the sky cried all day Friday, much of Saturday too. But that Saturday, May evening, there was some work to do. I knew little detail, ladies gathering on my behalf. 30 Morningside Drive. I pinched myself. A breast cancer ritual, and it's me. I entered to a scene wholly in service and craft. Hostess Heather greeted me, warm eyes, comforting nod. In the kitchen, ladies were at ease, working away, but at ease. Bryn had farms worth of kale, Jeanette a literal farm bucket of lilacs, Leona shaking palomas, bespoke with 3 ounces of tequila. An artistry of charcuterie, Maggie perfected 2 cheese platters, all this prep work with me in mind. We picnicked on a white blanket right there in the living room. Our centerpiece, white flowers, candles waiting to do their job. The buzz of female conversation and laughter, the most lovely tune. The sisters then left and gathered elsewhere. I sat there on my own. I could hear laughter and scheming, joyful service in the tone. They entered back and singing, holding candles and lighting more, each one looking at me, in me, reassuring, solidarity. They shared their declarations, support without judgment, pity, conditions, support of their own pains, weaknesses, needs. Sisterhood, I kept thinking. This is what it means. Heather G. declared cancer bridesmaids. Yes, the hallowed thought. As hostess Heather guided me, I approached a bowl of ash and dirt. I heaped ashes of fears and shame, seeking words with which to use. The sisterhood mixed the ash and dirt one by one, massaging it bare hands. I succumbed to child's pose. They prayed communion over me, his body and his blood available and free. Each sister took a drink of wine as I addressed the literal and figurative cup I am to drink. Pausing to let it sink in, body sick, body changing, painful surgery. It touched my lips and something slipped, allowing present to usher in. The cup wasn't finished yet. We knew there was more to add. We passed it around, and each sister added a clump of the ash and dirt. The idea of a cup is one thing, it's the reality that will hurt. Before the drink, Leona spoke up, spoke of washing my feet, and I reclined in Heather G's lap, and the sisters went to work. Lindsay's hands massaging my left hand, Linda on my arm close to my side, Maggie in my right hand, Bran atop my head. My eyes were closed, and somehow I knew where each woman touched with love. Amber covering my body in gold dust, a prophetic vision honored and brought to life. May you feel a glimpse of his love for you, they quietly whispered as they worked. A flower crown created, gently set on my head. Alethea read from Psalms, her sing-song voice filled the room. With their arms they covered me, a tent of female strength. Truth declared over me. They recited God's living word. Leona snapped a photo, which will forever be cherished and framed. Finally, it was time to drink the dirt and ash-filled cup. I think what I realized, even as I was reading and remembering that time, is, as much as that ritual was for Casey, like all of us were undone by it. All of us had to remember our own pain, our own like longing for healing. It's like none of us could have been there hardened. There's just something about when humanity is raw and real and honest. Like it's hard not to join in on that. I know people do. I know people can remain hardened in those places, but there is something very disarming about the ritual space when we're really contending with kind of these raw elements of what it means to be human, both like the sorrow and the joy. And I think that's part of what I feel grateful for those moments that I get to witness and I get to be part of because it keeps me soft and it keeps me close to the earth.
It was delightful and agonizing to hear Casey's narration of that. But the part that moved me the most was when they are all touching, when you're massaging her, when you're touching her
Mm-hmm.
with your bodies and with your presences. And she received it,
Mm-hmm.
which is not easy to do. And my guess is she may not have been able to do it if it was not for the impending surgery. But the intensity of the extremity of breast cancer put her in a different space that allowed her to receive the care of the cancer bridesmaids. And all of you were changed. all of you, we could say, became more familiar with the death of Christ and with your own humanity. And frankly, in that sense, that ritual was a mockery of evil.
Oh, it's such a great, delicious mockery of evil. Like it's so delicious. Like that kind of mockery is let me live there all day long. Because it's something fierce. Like what like I love that she called us like a female tent. And that there was that moment where we're all gathered in a tent-like formation covering her. And it does. Like there's something impenetrable at that point. Like it's like, no, we are such honesty. Like there's no glossing over. There's no bypassing of what's happening. And so I think when you're on the ground in the dirt like that, like in the honesty of our lives, and then when we come around saying like we will protect this person, like we're going to protect the space and what they're entering, what they're confronting, what they're moving through. It's just there. I can't explain it except that there is like a force that surrounds that I don't feel very often, but certainly like I feel often in that kind of sacred space.
Yeah, it's palpable, it's tangible. The sacred space created by ritual intention, you can feel it. Something is happening we could just put it this way, in the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
Something is happening. And not just for not just for Casey.
Yeah. No, a lot of us talked about that days, weeks after, just the way that that marked us all.
Right. And in a culture where we commute to some sort of physical indoor space and sit in some sort of cubicle looking at a screen, sending emails, and then return home and have dinner and watch Netflix. Like it's almost as if like my being is crying out, this is crazy. Like we need to use
Yeah.
our bodies in community with the elements of the earth to enact rituals, to find out who the hell we are.
The Joseph Campbell quote of he talks about how we need a rescue land, like this sacred space that we get to come to, return to remember like who are we, our joy, our sorrow. And when we don't have that rescue land, I think we are pretty lost and we meander and we fill with whatever can kind of temper us for a moment, get us by for another moment. But we know like there's so much more we're meant to do and express and live out from. And I think ritual is this beautiful space that just continues to remind us of this is who you are. Remember who you are. Remember your story. Remember your name. Remember your face. And here are ways that you can remember that. So yeah, I think there's such a numbness and but I don't blame the Netflix and the the other ways that we kind of numb out. Like we haven't given imagination. We don't have an imagination for what could be, which is what happens every time I encounter someone who's like, I think I need this. Like I don't know. It seems like maybe I do. But then it's like it's so ancient, it's so in them. It's so like, oh yes, I know this. I need this. I know what to do. And that is always it's less surprising to me now, but there's still a little bit of surprise of like, oh right, we're all made for this kind of existing, right? But we do need the imagination. We do need like people helping one another to enter into our lives.
Yeah, and part of what you're talking about is what Francis Weller calls the village of elders. Like in my mind, elders are warriors. They're men and women who have learned how to use their power on behalf of the community, particularly the wounded in the community. And when we're not initiated by the village of elders into ritual, we don't know our right hands from our left. We don't know how to do anything other than what Dave Matthews called ants marching. That's all we know.
Yes.
But what you're bearing witness to, Heather, if I'm hearing you right, is that when you take the risk of creating some rituals, people suddenly find access to resources deep in their bodies of knowing how to do this. And it surprises you a little.
Yeah, I mean, I think it surprises me because it's such a niche thing. Like this whole, I mean, it's becoming obviously more in the atmosphere, like the role of ritual. But I think it's still this, is it woo woo? Is it what is this? I don't know. But that yeah, there's this strain that comes through that's like, I know I need this. And then when they are in ritual, yeah, there's moments where it's like they just need to get into the water. Like, or no, I don't need the stones here. I actually need the stones here. Or the meaning of what the dirt was turns into something completely different that they needed to actually confront or face. It's just I think that's part of the beauty of it is like it's there's something pretty enchanted, pretty spiritual that happens that I like you can't plan for. But I think when you create this space, you got to be ready for like some good stuff. But also some hard stuff. Like it's not all just like good and easy. You have to move through some of those hard, the difficult things. But going back to just like even the elders and not having people prepare us and teach us what it means to be a human in this world, what it means to be part of a community. There is, I mean, I don't know about you. I constantly feel like looking, I'm like looking, where's my mom? Where's my dad? Where's my mom? You know, it's just like I want my spiritual mothers and fathers, and it feels like there's such a scarcity. And so the few that are around, I kind of want to just like it does. It's like, oh, we so are looking for people that help us know how to move into who we are. And yeah, I think I think Weller talks about this too, where it's like, if we're not getting initiated, life will initiate us, but in ways that feel probably, I would say, more like an assault, right? Like we're blindsided, we're turned upside down, versus like if we do like the rituals of initiation, of like we are prepared. Like Casey, like she was that in some ways she was initiated into cancer, right? But she needed that in order to move into surgery where it's like she's getting cut open. She is there are things being yanked off her body that have meant beauty, pleasure, like nourishment for her kids. And so I think for her to have been prepared and initiated allows for that experience of surgery and loss to be more of a she has more agency in it.
Okay, I want to ask you, Heather, about something. I sent you some notes about the episode that I did on ritual solo, and you just wrote some comments on it. And at one point, you wrote the following. So I'm just going to read your phrase and then ask you to talk about it. You wrote, Jonah and the whale, the chrysalis, and the womb. Talk about those three things.
Yeah. I think Jonah and the Whale was this moment where you have this man who is fleeing his calling, and his calling is to disrupt a way of existing that was oppressive, that was not for the flourishing of all. He flees, he goes into the chaos of the sea, and in the chaos, he realizes that he's not going to survive it, and he tosses himself into the ocean, knowing that he's probably the reason why there's so much chaos happening. And in the midst of thinking he's going to die, the whale eats him, and in the belly, in this container, he has this encounter with who he actually is. And he has this moment of remembering himself, remembering God, remembering his story. And in that remembering, he feels a sense of like gratitude. And then I think I would say probably a desire to move back into what he was originally invited into, which was to bring restoration and truth to a people who were doing some pretty nasty things. This was a moment where I'm like, that's the ritual. That's kind of the point of why we need these spaces. We need the chrysalis, for example. Like that's where the caterpillar who is going to transform into a butterfly has to go into this space where everything breaks down, right? It becomes almost a sense of chaos there, where he becomes like there's like when people have opened up the cocoon, it's just like a soup, but within the soup are imaginal discs, and these discs have the blueprint of the future butterfly. So there's this kind of past, present, future happening here. And what they have found that once the transformation happens within the cocoon, the butterfly still remembers, still has the same preferences as the caterpillar. So there, it doesn't like certain smells or it likes certain tastes. So it's just this beautiful image of like we need this middle space where we get to come undone and be kind of surrendered so that transformation can happen, so that we can emerge new, but not without the past, right? Not without remembering like where we come from. And then I think about the womb too. I remember, I think Dan Allender said this to me when we were talking about rituals, that the womb is kind of like the original ritual. Like there's the heartbeat of the mother, there's the rushing of the amniotic fluids, there's this sense of like this is who I am, who is this kind of the original place of not just like safety and goodness, but also like possibility. All three of those containers just reveal to me that like we really like we desperately need intentional like bellies to enter so that we can contend with our life, so that we can remember our true calling, so that we can acknowledge the past, but then also begin to imagine like what is the future? Like what are these imaginal discs that exist in all of us? Like we all have, I think, these blueprints within our bodies that are trying to say like this is how you're meant to live, this is how you're meant to love, this is how you're meant to be loved. And yet I think because of life, because of Western society and trauma, like we're not given the space to have those moments. And that's where I think, yeah, the ritual is the place for that kind of transformation.
So, in that sense, ritual can be a chrysalis space for my heart, mind, and body to be transformed.
Yes, because it asks you to slow down and it asks you to remember. And I think in the slowing down and the remembering, we then have to confront like what's so difficult about slowing down, about remembering. And I think it's in that space that we get to be reoriented potentially. I think with community, I think that's part of the role of community is to help you remember like this is who you are, this is your face, this is what we know of you, so that we can have a reorientation to the future, not just to the present, but also to the future. Because otherwise, I think we kind of live pretty numb and we live pretty dissociative and we live kind of just trying to get by. And I think we all know that's not what we're meant for. Yeah, ritual kind of brings us back to our origins, but then also our imagination. Because I think the having being in community to slow down and to remember is really important. Because I think it makes sense to me why we don't when we're alone. Like it would be overwhelming. It would be just as a vulnerable, like more susceptible to, I think, all kinds of accusations or coping mechanisms to get out of that place. Part of what I'm sitting with right now is I think we need therapy. We need the container of therapy, right? Like there's something of like being able to really process verbally and have that kind of slowing down space to make sense of, piece together, and confront what we've known in that kind of container. I think what also needs to be true, and I think part of the process is we need to hear water being poured into a bowl as we are remembering like the amount of desecration we've known in our story, the amount of dirtying of our bodies. Like we need to hear the water pouring that's like for us, on behalf of washing us, on behalf of cleansing us. Like we need the ash to mark, our mouths for the ways in which like we were told we were always too much, or the ways in which we were told that you don't make sense. I think there's something of that physical element that appeals to all of our senses. And I think our senses are kind of the window into a more holistic experience. Like they are the ones that lead us into heart, kind of the synthesis of heart, mind, body, soul. But we need to hear things, we need to touch things, we need to taste things that bring to life what we've known. And I think we live from a more deeper place when we have those moments. And we get to return to them. Like I think that's the other thing. Like the moment that I, feel like, oh, I'm not making sense. Like I have that memory of the ash, but then also have the memory of like the community around me helping me like wash it off and anoint my mouth. And so it's like we have to have those signposts in our lives in order to continue to live and move and have our being.
When you said a while ago, it's hard for us to remember, to slow down and to remember, it reminded me of one of Francis Weller's points that I made on the previous episode about it is hard for us to welcome back discarded shards of stories. And one of the reasons that I think ritual is so effective at restoring emotional health, restoring our bodies to a state of shalom, is that ritual creates a context for me to welcome back, to remember, to slow down and remember those discarded shards of stories from my especially growing up years. As I say that, what comes up for you?
Hmm.
Especially as I say that in the context of being surrounded by witnesses, 3, 4 witnesses to the ritual, participants in it, but people that are bearing witness to my discarded shards of stories that I'm marking in that moment.
When we have witnesses in those moments, it makes the discarded shards, they're not as, like, depending on how they've been used against us, they become dismantled, I think. Like there's something of that they don't become these monsters or these antagonizers or like these like shameful bits. They become welcomed and therefore we can actually integrate them, make meaning of them, and then integrate them in a, and I think in a very and more embodied way than just talking about it. But yeah, I think that's the thing. Like we do need it witnesses up the ante always in a ritual or in anything that we do. But that is the place where I think shame doesn't have the last word, where we get to actually feel the shame of it, but then realize like, oh, we don't die here. Like we're not going to die. We're not going to get radically rejected here. They actually get to come and sit and hopefully be more integrated into our lives. So that I think that's what I think of and what I've seen in rituals where people become much more comfortable and familiar and able to work with like those shards that have previously been a source of pain or antagonism.
One of the things you've said, I've heard you say, is that rituals interrupt old ways of being, old patterns. Rituals interrupt. Can you say how have you experienced that personally?
Yeah, I mean that's like when I'm writing about ritual, that's one of the first elements of ritual is the sacred interruption. I experienced it for myself. I didn't realize I was doing a ritual at the time, but looking back, it's like, oh, that was a ritual. My dad had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and my grandfather died of Parkinson's disease. So it's like, oh, this is in the family, somehow in some way. And I felt this impending doom of I will be getting Parkinson's. And so it just began this kind of roller coaster of anxiety and fear. And any movement that I'd make, any forgetful moment that I'd have, I just kind of clench down and clamp down, clench my fist, and feel the kind of the antagonism of this disease. And one time I was visiting them, my parents, at their house, and it was at night, and I had kind of had a day of feeling the fear and anxiety since I was around my dad all day. And I was heading downstairs to go to bed, and I wanted to watch TV. I wanted to dissociate. I wanted to like get away from the day. And as I was making my way down, I mean, I see the basement door open. I see those great steps leading me to that wonderful rectangle that will, let me just go away. But on the corner of my eye, I also see the sliding back door. And I felt this like very flash invitation to go out. And I had that moment of like, do I or don't I? Do I, don't I? And for whatever reason, I decided I'll heed the call. And I went through the back door and I was like, okay, what am I supposed to do right now? Like I'm here. I know I'm supposed to come outside, but now what? And I felt just the like the summer smells of like grass, fresh cut grass. The sky was clear, and I felt the sense of like lay down and look up at the stars. And it was in this moment of kind of like this really beautiful, like beautiful night sky that I don't know if you have these experiences, but the night sky always, it's like this moment of like, I'm so small and compared to the grand scheme of things. And not in this like negative way, but in this like awe and wonder kind of a way. And it was in this moment I felt kind of contained by the night sky to then begin to speak my fear. Like I'm afraid of dying. I'm afraid I'm going to get Parkinson's. I'm afraid of what my dad's going to have to face in the next 10, 20 years. And all of a sudden, it all started to flow out of me. I think fear and anxiety often keeps us from actually naming what's happening, because it's like if we name it, then it's only going to grow bigger. But I think because of like the ritual nature of that, of heeding the call and then being kind of contained by the universe in that moment, and feeling a sense of like God's asking me to speak, it shifted. It shifted the way that I engage my fear and anxiety. And I would have to have that engaged again because my mom, I think maybe 5 years later, gets breast cancer, which is even like a bigger fear and anxiety. And this time I wasn't heeding the call of the back sliding door. This time I was at the playground with my kids and I felt the fear and anxiety, and I got into the swing. I felt the swing. Like the call was to get on the swing and to feel myself kind of be, you kind of have to surrender to the movement, and then began to speak the fears. And I felt again like the shift happened inside my body where it's like, okay, I am going to die. Like that is part of my reality. And if I have to confront this disease, like I know I can do it. I know I can actually engage it and face it, but also release what's not mine to hold right now. So I see ritual as this like really important interruption to old patterns, to old behaviors that we're so accustomed and that are so seductive. But there's something for us, I think, if we can see that flash call. And I think that flash calls are, or those flash invitations are everywhere.
But the premise that you just stated quite explicitly is that you believe we live in an enchanted world.
Mm, yeah, that is good. Uh-huh.
Where the divine, through it was just the side of your left eye that you saw the sliding glass door, and you noticed it, and you felt a flash beckoning call. You felt it in your body, and in that moment you heeded the call. You let your body follow the hallway through the door to the grandeur of the cosmos outside on the grass.
Mm.
And something happened out there, but you didn't know what was going to happen until you walked through the door.
Mm-hmm. Right. And there is something that clicked once I walked through the door, that threshold, where it's like I kind of knew what to do.
Uh-huh.
And I think that is interesting. Like it's like, once I said yes to it, it was like it all kind of fell together. And it's not that I knew, 3 steps from now what was going to happen, but I knew the next step. I knew what I needed to do. So it does feel like it realigns you. Yeah, the notion of ritual, or like the invitation of ritual, is for you to kind of come back into alignment, with yourself, with God, with creation, and that there is this inner wisdom, this inner knowing of what we need to do, but you do have to heed that call.
Well, Heather, this has been so fun and frankly, both inspiring for me and inviting to step more deeply into places that you have clearly gone in my own life. So thank you again for coming back on the podcast. You do stuff with ritual that people can participate in. If people want to connect with you, how do they do that?
I do stuff. The best ways are on Instagram. I usually post whatever stuff I'm doing. So I am life_in_ritual. And then my website is lifeinritual.com. And you can sign up on a newsletter. I'm not great about newsletters. I'm trying to be consistent, but sometimes you can find out things through my newsletter. But those two, the website and Instagram, are the best ways to stay connected. So
Great. Thank you so much, Heather.
thank you, Adam. It was such a joy. I appreciate it so much.